Striking. Barbara, one of the reasons that I'm an optimist in this debate, though, there is a much bigger appetite amongst the business community to solve this, and that was one of the big takeaways from Mike's contribution. Blueprint for Better Business is an organisation that is really working hard, isn't it now, to bring as many individual business leaders at all levels of organisations, actually, into this kind of debate.
Yep, absolutely. So if I just explain a bit about Blueprint for Better Business, it's set up with both business and civil society as part of it, very much to encourage business, not only to work to a set of ethical principles, but even more fundamentally, to think about, for the business individually, to think about what is the core purpose of our business and does it serve society? Now, as you know, there are quite a lot of sets of guidance and principles in different ways, Global Compact, Ruggie principles, that do actually go after a very similar set of ethical principles as Blueprint does. But I think this point of moving to the purpose of business being to provide products and services which are of value to society is incredibly important. Because in effect, that is really the license for business to operate. Business should not be operating if it is not doing something of value to society. That also has another tag on it, which is to do that, there has to be the possibility of public scrutiny, because you've got to know that those things are happening, including going along with those ethical principles that you've signed up to. So it is a movement. Now, if I just back off that for a minute and say how I got into that, I got into it really very much from the Oxfam end of things, where spending those 12 years often engaging with the private sector. Now, Oxfam has always started with the point that actually the private sector actually has an enormous contribution to make to getting poor people out of poverty by, the normal things, job creation, buying actually through supply chains from small producers and all those sorts of things. But equally, of course, and that's where I probably was when I started right in 2001, looking at the most egregious behaviour that companies often exhibit in the poorest countries, whether that's the extractive industries or more recently land grabs where people just take land off poor people without any compensation, the things that we know about in the garment industry where you're putting such pressure down your supply chains that then we're shocked to find out what the pay and working conditions is of people in those factories. So I spent a lot of time in Oxfam actually at first probably more on the campaigning side of trying to get the private sector to behave better in the poorest countries. And a bit like Francis, I've had a few eyeballs of chief executives looking at me like, what on earth do you mean? How, you don't mean to say I'm a bit unethical, do you? Well, yes, I'm sorry you are. But actually, over time, I do think there has been that change. I now, Oxfam, in my time in Oxfam, we were working to a time where there were many more companies who were beginning to see that that really wasn't the right way to go about things. Leaders in those companies who just themselves thought it was morally wrong. But actually an enormous push from employees too, because actually employees don't like going to the pub or the dinner party. And actually people saying to them, what's your company doing, here, I've just heard this on the news. They really do not like that. So there is a movement that has been growing along. And actually Blueprint fits in with that, I think, very strongly, because I think one of the key things about Blueprint, it is about companies coming together, because an individual company often can't change some of the things that are happening. You mentioned actually about quarterly reporting. The first ones that did that, it was pretty dodgy stuff. It's hard to do things individually. It's the same in developing countries. It's quite hard for one company to actually pay a living wage right down their supply chains if other companies that were operating there are not doing that. So actually you do need this idea of a lot of people coming together, and that's what Blueprint's about. In many of these sets of ethical principles, there are regulations or there are compliance, and you need some of that. But actually, how much better if companies are actually, if you like, persuading each other, working along together in order that actually you're doing it inside out, if you like, rather than being pressed outside in to do something better. And, to me, having seen some of this, it just feels enormously positive, actually, to operate in that way. I mean, how much nicer for an employee to go to work for a company that they know is concerned about climate change and to actually is taking its place in the Prince of Wales Corporate Leaders Group, Or, you know, one of the people who signed up to the blueprint, actually Paul Feeney from Old Mutual Wealth, you know, he was saying, you know, what I want all my employees to do is, when they're selling products of Old Mutual, I want them to decide, first of all, whether they'd sell it to their own mother or not. Now, how much better it is when that is coming from the inside out and actually really changing everybody's behaviour, both at the leadership level, but also, you know, at the employee level. When I hear that, I feel like, in a funny way, an enormous weight is taken off my shoulders, that actually people might actually be doing the right things, both because actually this is what their business wants of them, but actually there's no reason that in itself does not make money too, and certainly produces a sort of sustainability that people have been talking about here, and actually probably produces the creativity that the Archbishop has been talking about, because if you're starting to do your business according to a core purpose that's good for business, then actually you start thinking about innovation, about how to do that and how to do things in the right way. So that's what the Blueprint for Better Business is, and it is beginning to grow and take off, as Mike said. There are a lot of companies and a lot of leaders of those companies who actually are really sort of saying, for those reasons that Mike has said about, we don't want to be in a society where nobody trusts us. It's not good for our business. It's not good for, you know, how we feel about things. And actually this is just one mechanism, but a rather powerful mechanism, I think, for actually getting business to come together with other businesses to learn, share, and really start that momentum going, because you do need that momentum.
But presumably